In this section, we will deal with the Lord or Yahweh's appearance to Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre. This is a significant passage for a number of reasons, as we will see. In the previous chapter, we find the Lord or Yahweh making a covenant with Abraham. This is in Genesis chapter 17. Or a promise to bless the world through Abraham. In chapter 18, which is the passage we'll discuss today on this video, we will see that the Lord picks up on the covenant motif discussed in chapter 17 and shows Abraham how it will be fulfilled by his wife Sarah's future pregnancy. Okay, as we discussed in the intro, Genesis 17 is about the Lord's covenant with Abraham, and I want to read that so that we can set the context for what we're going to read in Genesis 18. And we won't read the whole chapter, just a small portion of it. Okay, Genesis 17:1. Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. And just to make sure our terminology is correct here, and it says, Vayirah Adonai el Avram, which means in the Lord or the Yahweh appeared to Abram. Okay, making sure that we see that Yahweh is the one who is talked about here. And actually, all the passages I will show you, this verb construction, which is from the Hebrew word ra'ah, which means to see. Okay, here it means more like to cause to see. In English, we would translate that as appear. Okay, anyways, I'm going to stay away from the Hebrew as much as I can because it might bore some people. Okay, so in this passage we see the Lord or Yahweh making covenant promises to Abraham. The Lord promises to Abram that he will make Abraham a father to many nations. The problem is that up until that time, Abraham and Sarah did not have any offspring to fulfill such a grand promise. The main point to keep in mind here is who promised these things, namely the Lord or Yahweh. The other key point is the promise itself of making Abraham into a father of many nations. This is the theme the next chapter picks up. Okay, and that's what we're going to right now. Okay, now it says, and we're just going to read this. It's going to be a little bit lengthy, but I want to read this just to make sure we get all the key points. Here we're in Genesis 18 and verse 1. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. Okay, so here we see, up here in the highlighted, we see that 3 men came to him, or 3 men were standing opposite him. Okay, that's a significant point, which we'll see later on. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, There in the tent. He said, I will surely return to you at this time next year. And behold, Sarah your wife will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door which was behind him. So obviously here we see one of the men said, I will surely return to you this time next year. And later we're going to see who that person was. Okay, so thus far we see that Abraham was visited by what the text says were 3 men. We need to remember this because the text explains who these men were a little later. Okay, continuing. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? So in other words, Abraham's old too, so she's laughing about the prospect of having a child. Essentially, she's laughing about the promise that Yahweh made in Genesis 17. So, continuing. And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child, why I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? And this word here, as a side note, is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in the Hebrew, which is Yahweh or Jehovah in Jehovah's Witness terminology. At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh. And then the men rose up from there and looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed? This is exactly what he said, and this was the exact promise the Lord made Abraham in Genesis 17. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. And this is a direct reference to God's covenant to him in chapter 17, like I said before. And the Lord said, The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was standing before the Lord. And we'll comment on this highlighted portion a little bit later. Abraham came near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Okay, now Abraham converses with the Lord about saving some of the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah if the Lord can find any righteous people in those cities. For brevity's sake, we will not read these verses. Feel free to read them if you would like. We will continue with verse 32 below. Then he said, Oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. What is noteworthy here is at the beginning of the chapter, 3 men appeared to Abraham. 2 of them turned to inspect Sodom and Gomorrah in verse 22. And we'll read this again here. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. This fact is confirmed in the first verse of chapter 19. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. This shows the reader that one of the 3 men who met Abraham was the Lord himself, or was Yahweh himself, as evidenced in the last verse of chapter 18. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. The last time I checked, and I'm not trying to be too sarcastic here, but the last time I checked, 3 minus 2 equals 1. One of the men who met Abraham was none other than the Lord. If the Lord or Yahweh in heaven were talking here with Abraham, one would expect 3 of the angels to have left for Sodom and Gomorrah. At best, if only 2 angels left, this would leave 1 angel unaccounted for. It is quite evident that Abraham saw the Lord personally here as a man. The 2 others headed for Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, and I really didn't want to digress into the New Testament at this time, but I think I'm going to do that anyways. We'll be using the New Testament a lot later on, but what we're trying to do here is is to establish an Old Testament basis for more than one person being called capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, or Yahweh in the Old Testament. Okay, back to the discussion. The problem is that we see in the Gospel of John 1:18, the verse that says, "No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, He has explained Him." Okay, and then my point here is, does this point to the fact that Jesus, who was seen while He was on earth, could not be equated with the angel of the Lord, or the man spoke with Abraham, because the man is scarcely presented as Yahweh in this passage? This is not a tenable position, because Yahweh was seen here by Abraham. Do we thus conclude that Yahweh was not God because He was seen? The only real possibility that reconciles John 1:18 with the various appearances of Yahweh as the angel of the Lord is the recognition that there are at least two persons that are called Yahweh. Otherwise, the appearances of Yahweh in the Old Testament couldn't be the God spoken of in the New Testament. This is what we will establish from the Old Testament on the upcoming videos. And as a note, in the next video we will inspect one of the early church fathers, Justin Martyr's discussion with Trypho the Jew, which clearly establishes this view not based upon conjecture but upon the text of the Bible itself. He will be discussing the same passage, but at the same time he will be reasoning from the Scripture with someone that has totally rejected Jesus as God, as the God. So I think this will be helpful in our discussion with Jehovah's Witnesses in the future. And later, I'm sorry I haven't got to the Jehovah's Witnesses views yet, because I want to set a biblical precedent first. Before we do that, we have to know what we believe before we discuss it with them. Okay, I'll see you on the next video.